I would like to welcome our guest today, Tilda Swinton. We're doing this talk a lot in the cinema, but today is very special because you are here with us, and of course with the team from Memorial and Chapo himself here today. But you've been to this building before, right?
Well, I've been to a section of this building before. I've been to the roots of it. I came with Apichapong in 2018, and we saw the beginnings of the plant that was growing. And I'm incredibly touched and moved to see that it's as finished as it is. I didn't quite expect. I've been asking Joey over the years, how is it going? We had a fantasy that we would premiere Memoria here. I look forward to premiering more films with him here in the future. But I didn't expect it to have a roof. So it's a really, really, beyond an honour, it's a real pleasure and a huge boost to the heart to be in this incredible new garden of culture and cinema, which I feel this is.
Hopefully you will have time to take a look around the building afterwards. That would be an honour to all of us here.
And you have been not just in Bangkok this time, you stopped over in Phuket. How was the experience?
I mean, what a luxury to have to go to Phuket, to quarantine for a few days. It was very tough, especially from the winter in Europe. No complaints.
So let me start by saying that today's masterclass will be an attempt to discuss, to encapsulate the career of one of the most prolific and versatile actresses that work in world cinema today. So we hope to touch on, well, some of your roles, your cinema work, your collaborations with some of the most visionary and radical filmmakers, from Direk Jaman, the great Direk Jaman, Peter Wall and Jonah Hawk, who else? So many of them, Wes Anderson, Bong Joon-ho, Jim Jarmusch, and of course Apisha Weerasethapul. But as you said before, this is going to be a conversation between people who love cinema and people who love acting.
Although I have been warned by you yourself just now that acting is not my topic. So let's see how we're going to hear the conversation.
It was not meant to be a warning. It was just meant to be a piece of information that might mean that we could use our time more profitably.
Sure. Actually, let us get this out of the way, maybe, because I know that a lot of people are coming here today with this kind of concept or idea and really interested in what everyone thinks and sees as acting. But what is it for you? Maybe from day one that you started acting in film, and until today, what does it mean and has it changed?
I have never been interested in acting. I'm still not interested in acting. I don't identify as an actor. I'm not working in cinema as an actor. I'm working as a filmmaker, and this was really the way I was privileged to be able to start with Derek Jarman. And it's very interesting to hear. I'm looking forward to this conversation because it will be a conversation, but I'm aware that there are, again, not warnings, but maybe apologies that I need to make. I'm not interested in a career. I'm not aware of having a career. I am aware and very interested in having a life and of living an artist's life alongside other artists. And as I say, to start my work in cinema with Derek Jarman really set my course. We worked in a collective, all of us, whatever our particular contribution to the landscape, whether it was with Simon Fisher-Turner, who's a great composer, actually started working with Derek looking for extras in the streets of London and ended up being a great film composer, or whether it was me, who a lot of the time was holding the camera with the Super 8, or whether it was Chris Hughes, who... Anyway, we were a family, as I'm privileged to be able to say I have other families. But this idea of being involved in any kind of industry or any kind of professional kind of job description, that is really anathema to me. And in a way, the miracle has been that I've been able to escape it. Even though I've worked with some professionals in my time, I've always managed to escape thinking of myself as a professional.
Why is that such a word with... Is it a threat to call yourself a professional?
It's just a point of accuracy. It's just a point of accuracy. I know that actors, what I call real actors, very often take their craft very seriously. They very often train. Even for the cinema, I gather, I have no idea what they learn in film school to perform. It must be very interesting, but I can't imagine what it is. And I know also that a lot of actors have a strong allegiance to the theatre, both concurrently with the relationship with cinema, or maybe they start in the theatre and then they go and work in the cinema at a later point. That to me is a mystery. I can't imagine what can be useful in the cinema that comes from the theatre. But again, I'm ignorant. So it's really a point of accuracy about my ignorance. It's not meant as a disrespect. I would rather be the one to say it before somebody else stands up and says she's a fake.
Right. That's very interesting. But you have had experience with theatre yourself, have you not?
Years and years ago, I went, first of all, I was always, my shame is that I am a writer who stopped writing. I went to university as a writer. And when I stopped writing, I had friends who were interested in the theatre. And because of them and because I loved their fellowship, I started working with them. I mean, the first thing I did was I actually directed a piece of theatre when I was at Cambridge. And then they pulled me into their plays, so I started performing. And then, because at that point I was at a university in England, Cambridge University, and at that point there was no cinema course, there was no school of cinema there. There is now. I had the bittersweet experience of going to, they asked me to open the film studies school at Cambridge, and I was so conflicted because I was so thrilled, but I was so envious, because had it been open when I was an undergraduate, I would have gone there. And there was no cinema at that time at the university. So had there been, my interest was always in cinema, not necessarily to perform. I never really thought of performing, but maybe to write and to work with a frame. And then when I left university, in a slightly half-hearted way, I was pulled into being a theatre actor for a while. But I learned very quickly that I wasn't really interested in it. And I was at the point of stopping performing completely when I met Derek Jarman.
Now that you mentioned Derek Jarman, I was not at the premiere yesterday, but I heard you said a little bit about working with Derek Jarman. So that was the mid-80s, right? And I suppose that must be a very exciting time in British cinema or British artistic scene. Watching the films from those periods, Caravaggio, Debaga, War Requiem, Wittgenstein, so many of them. You made like maybe 10 with Jarman. And I feel this spontaneous energy, but also this intense passion of the people involved in making those films. And there's so many directors coming up during that time. Would you say something about being in that cauldron of activity,
It's so interesting. You are absolutely right, Gong. I mean, looking back on it, it was really an extraordinary moment. But this is the strange thing about history. At the time, we felt it was terrible. We felt it was a complete dearth. Because, of course, we were at war, in a way, in a cultural war. I think I saw outside that you just screened Friendship's Death.
Yes, you saw it screened it this morning.
Wow, yeah. I mean, this was the second film that I ever made in 1986. Also, another extraordinary filmmaker, Peter Wallen. There were many, not just, obviously, Derek Jarman. There was a tendency at that time, but it was an underground tendency. And it was independent with a small I. I mean, it's hard for you to imagine, but in those days, independent cinema didn't really have a capital I yet. And there was not yet what I call codependent cinema, which is a sort of branch, a sort of diffusion line of the studio system. That had not been invented yet. There was in the UK, there was the most preeminent kind of cultural film there was an incredibly rich and vibrant television culture, which has been slowly demolished over the last decades. But a lot of creative attention was focused on television. There was a certain strand of high international industrial cinema. David Lean was still alive at that time. You had people like Richard Attenborough. You had these big, very often kind of slightly imperial, if not colonial, view of widescreen cinema, which those of us who love big cinema were interested in, but at the same time didn't feel quite accurate. And then there was this extraordinarily rich cauldron, which was supported by the British Film Institute, the BFI. And there was a man there called Peter Sainsbury who actually left, when he left the BFI, he went down to Sydney, to the AFI, and he was very instrumental in supporting the work of people like Jane Campion, for example. And they had a really responsible, and in my view, healthy sort of tradition of saying to a filmmaker, here's a little bit of money, maybe £200,000, just a little bit of money, but we will be here for your next 5, 6, 7 films. We're interested in you, we're interested in your development as an artist, and we want you to feel free to go your own way. And they did this for Peter Wallen, for Sally Potter, for Ron Peck, for Peter Greenaway, for Derek Jarman. Many, many filmmakers came out of that garden, this feeling really of being grown. And again, you don't need much money to make a film. There was this, in the high industrial sort of section of the forest, there was this idea that you needed a lot of money to make a film. And one thing that we learned was that you really don't. And particularly in the work that we made with Derek with Super 8, you literally need no money to make a Super 8 film, because you shoot it like a home movie over the course of maybe 2 years, like we did with The Last of England, and then you kind of piece it together afterwards. And then at the very end, you find some money to distribute it. But it was a very empowering time for filmmakers in that climate.
Is there any element of political awakening in all of this as well? In the 80s with the Thatcher era and the Falkland War. I'm just curious because what you said was obviously influenced by what's going on around the world and in England as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say it's difficult to tell chicken or egg. I mean, we were all politically engaged at that time, and the work and that engagement felt absolutely hand in glove. That's why I said originally that it felt like it was awful. It was we were having fun together and we were making work, but we did feel like we were pushing against a kind of, not only literally political tendencies. For example, in the late 80s, when the Thatcher government were bringing in Clause 28, which was this clause restrictive of gay life and gay culture, we were incredibly involved in that. In fact, the film Edward II, which Derek made in, I think, 1990, I get a bit muddled with the dates, was made in collaboration with Outrage, which was a political group that we worked very closely with, and it actually features in the film. So it wasn't only that, but also culturally. I mean, there was I smile because it seems almost quaint now, but there was this general political shift all over the world. But with Thatcher and in America with Reagan, where culture was just getting, not just squeezed, but getting kind of gaslit out of our experience, and the financial commitment to cultural work became sort of reduced. And the cultural budget in the UK started going hand in hand with the tourism budget, which is such a bad idea. Because then it means that the government can say that Sammy and Rosie Get Laid or The Last of England is a terrible vision of the UK and, will be very bad for tourism. And you'll have these enormous articles written about how irresponsible certain artists were. I mean, this was, looking back, it's almost amusing to imagine that this was, as well as everything else, something that we were having to deal with.
And I'm smiling now because what you said reminds me of a certain place. Exactly the same.
In the current time.
It's in the current time, not 30 years ago.
It's a happening thing. It's
quite trendy.
Yeah. But it doesn't last.
Right.
It doesn't.
Right. Looking back at that period again, of course, I think one of the most memorable movies you made is Orlando, of course. Is that the first time that you took up a role of a man? Of course, half of it you were a woman, but also you played a man, which Orlando was both.
Funnily enough, not. And the last piece of last piece of live performance that I made was a one-woman show by an East German writer called Manfred Karger, called Man to Man. And it was this piece that Sally Potter saw just before she asked me to play Orlando. I'd been working with identity for a long time. I suppose, I don't know, I can't even remember. I'm not really clear what gender I indicate in any of my work or at any time. So, but I feel that was maybe the first narrative that involved this idea of fluid gender. Yeah.
Did it take you a kind of a unique approach or understanding in order to get into the character of Orlando, or how did you see this movie in the process? Because you did say in some interviews that it was a costume film by Sarah, but how was it like for you being in that film, acting as an actor in it?
Again, I don't know what I can say about acting. It was very important, clear to us that it was important that the audience have a close contact with Orlando. The book, Virginia Woolf's book, is all about a kind of being in the present moment. It's about time, and it's about a way of remaining present and remaining boundaryless and fluid and flexible and awake. And so we knew that this was the core of whatever I was going to do, was going to have a sense of aliveness and not get lost in any acting or any character or any distancing for the audience. And also, because of the narrative, Orlando has to remain the same. I mean, on first look, it feels like that's a narrative about change, but I would say it's actually not. It's about consistency. It's about constant fluidity, meaning an actual permanent state of awakeness, which actually doesn't change. So it occurred to me that what Orlando needed to be was the same. The things that change for Orlando are the dresses and the wigs, and a few contact lens colours, which are sort of secret. But and lighting, and framing, and movement. But that the core of the being of Orlando, I don't use the word character, the being of the person of Orlando had to remain the same. And then we also developed this contact with the audience, this looking into the camera, which I'd already worked with Derek with. I remember the first film I made with Derek, Caravaggio. There was a moment when I'd never made a film before, and I was enjoying myself, but at the same time, I was finding myself aware that I was being watched and wanting to watch back. And at a certain point, he invited me. I asked him, "Can I look back?" And he said, "Yeah." So there's a moment in Caravaggio when I look into the lens, and this became a very important sort of anchor for me, almost as an author, to be present, for me, Tilda, to be present. And then Orlando, we really developed it. So Orlando looks and talks to the audience throughout in kind of present time. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but that explains really the relationship between consistency and change.
It's interesting because it's quite paradoxical actually that the consistency that you gave is the change, is the fluidity which maintains. So it's like both at the same time that you
Well, there's the great portal in the film is the moment when Orlando goes to sleep male, more or less, and wakes up more or less female, and looks into the camera and says, "Same person, no difference at all, just a different sex." This is a very easy statement. It's not fraught with any kind of effort. It's not. It's not a big deal.
Yes, and you mentioned Orlando and identity. And as you said, we screened Friendship's Death this morning. And actually, in fact, last month, a small cinema in Thailand, in Bangkok, screened Caravaggio. So a lot of people went to see it, and I think it's a good introduction to your career and your approach to acting. In Friendship's Death, I just want to bring this up a little bit because you brought the subject of identity. In the film, you play a robot from outer space who came to Earth to stop a war, more or less. And then the whole thing is about you and Bill Patterson talking in the room. And then, well, talking in the room why war is raging outside, which is again like what is happening in the world right now. And there's one point that Bill Patterson said to you that the Bill Patterson character said to your character that when I treat you as a robot, when I treat you as a woman, you remind me that you are a robot. And when I treat you as a robot, you keep reminding me that you are a woman. And then you said, I think for me that's the key of the film or our session today. Then you said, no, I'm sorry. After having said that, Bill Patterson said, "It's sinister," and that you keep reminding me that you are a woman. And then he said, "It's sinister. It's very sinister." And then you said, "Mimicry is always sinister." And to me, that sums up acting. Acting is so sinister. It's so weird because I don't act. And I was meaning to ask you about mimicry is always sinister.
I agree with you. I think that puts it very nicely. I think, and again, and I hope this doesn't sound too heavy, but reminding myself, as I just mentioned, that my sort of inner wiring is that of a writer. I think, taking my place in a frame is my way of, has been for the last few years, my way of writing. And my authorship is incredibly precious to me. It's what I have, it's my material. And I'm much more invested in my own voice and my own authorship than I am in any kind of mimicry or any kind of interpretation, actually. And again, I repeat, I know that interpretation is a great, some might say art, it's certainly a craft and can be parlayed into art by many, many greatly gifted people. But it just isn't what makes me rock. And I agree with friendship. I think the idea of mimicry, the idea of fooling, faking, and lying is sinister. It's kind of fascinating that people can do it. And people do it all the time. But there's something, I mean, when I was at university, working with my friends who were the real actors and directors, I was very interested in Brecht. I was very interested in particular in a great poem of Brecht's about everyday theatre, where it's his advice to actors. He says, stop being so fake. Go out into the street, see that woman who's shouting at that driver who nearly ran her child over, and shouting at her dog. She's really invested in what she's trying to say. That's what I want from you. I don't want any kind of perfect curlicues of gesture. I don't want any beauty even. I want something authentic, and I want your expression and your voice. And that was really what I was always interested in when I worked in the theatre. And I suppose that's my connection, really. Always trying to find a way of telling the truth.
So maybe that's the basis of what we think of you as shape-shifting ability, I think, maybe. Would you say that this investment is more the core of going into different, again, characters or roles? Is this something that enables you to shape-shift, or do you even see yourself as a shape-shifter, actually?
Well, again, it's interesting having just sort of mapped through the way we put Orlando together, because I suppose that explains what I'm doing. I don't feel like I change at all. But I do put on different pieces of clothing and different wigs, and occasionally different voices. And I am, as a cine nerd, completely in love with this opportunity life has brought me to work with different colleagues in different frames. To work with Bong Joon-ho is a beautiful adventure. To work with Wes Anderson is a beautiful adventure. To work with Joanna Hogg, to work with Joey, they all feel like home to me. Am I such a schizophrenic that I can be at home with all of them? But I really feel I can. And in a way, there's something that doesn't change. The dialogue, the communication, the conversation, the love, the feeling of complicity and excitement, that's exactly the same over and over again. It's just that with Bong Joon-ho, of late, we've sort of examined a kind of grotesque, which has meant a kind of disguise, worked with people who are disguised. With Joanna and with Joey, I've been very much working with people who are not. They are not disguised at all. In fact, they almost have no skin. But it's the complicity is the same.
Just to stay with the subject of mimicry and acting a little bit. Sometimes when we hear people praise actors or actresses, you read in the review and they say the acting or the performance is very natural. And I always find this a little bit strange, natural. It means you are naturally being someone else, or what does it mean to be natural in acting? And does it really mean anything? Does the adjective even work when you write a review of performance?
I don't know. I mean, what's the alternative, I suppose? The alternative is that you can see the acting and it's being transmitted and there's something performative, which some people really love to see and some people love to do as well. And sometimes some of us find it distracting. Sometimes it's appropriate. I don't know. I think it can be anything. And everybody has their own response. But I'm for myself, I love to see unwatched people who are unwatched. I love documentary. I love to see the films of Robert Bresson, for example, and he also didn't call his co-workers actors, he called them models. And if I had to write a title on my passport, which you used to have to do to say what you were, I would rather write model than actor. But I would most like to write filmmaker because it feels the most accurate.
Just to go back a little bit to direct German, because you, as an actress, your career took off with Caravaggio and your early work with German. Some of the most inspiring films of the period, of a lot of young film watchers, film viewers, even in this part of the world. I think I read that you once said that every film you make with direct German start with a conversation, and the film is just a way that you both try to express that conversation. I'd like to know the process of collaboration between you and direct German, and how you kept working with him for such a long time. And how did that shape you as a person or as an actor?
Well, I would say that it's really not any different to the work that I'm making now with Joe, or with Joanna, or with Wes Anderson, or with Bong Joon-ho, or with Jim Jarmusch. It's an attention to the conversation as the most important thing. It's like that's the trunk of the tree. And that's the thing that goes on and on and on for years. And then the films, not only films, but the projects, whether they are, sometimes Derek and I would make maybe a performance, or we would make an installation, or Joe and I made a film festival. Those pieces, they're like the leaves on the tree. They kind of pop out to the side of the conversation. And they come out, and then they fall. But the tree is still there, and the tree is still generating more sap and more branches and more leaves. And that's the thing that I love. The other reason why that's a kind of useful mechanism to work that way is it takes your attention off the piece itself. It takes the pressure off the piece itself, and it keeps the piece alive, so that it's not a sort of product that has to be completed. It means that when you're actually shooting or in pre-production, you're still dealing with question marks. You're still searching. You're not sort of achieving and ticking a box and feeling like something's been completed. It always feels like it's still alive. I mean, I feel that with all the work. I feel that with Friendship's Death, which was made in 1986 and has only just had its new print made, and you saw it, some of you saw it this morning. It's still alive. There's still a dialogue going on. I feel it about Memoria, which has, just been planted in the ground in Bangkok yesterday. It's this feeling of, just goes on and on and on. And I think the idea that a film is a product, or something to be sort of finished ever, is not useful. And it's certainly tough on the heart of the filmmaker, because the filmmaker is still in dialogue with the piece.
Among the direct Germans film, to me, the one that stays with me is The Last of England for some reason, especially the scene you in front of a big fire, well, unfortunately, we cannot show the film here, but I think you can look it up somewhere. But that scene is very, very intense, and when I watched it a long time ago, somewhere I cannot remember, it really stays with me. I don't know, can you say something about The Last of England?
The Last of England is also, I would say, my favourite. If I have to choose one of our children, it's the favourite of my films with Derek Jarman. I can tell you about the making of that film, because that film, you asked me a question before which I didn't answer, which I'll answer now. So to work with Derek Jarman the film work tended to fall into two categories, really, two sort of tendencies. There was the 35mm work, and as you know, 35mm is expensive. It needs lights, it needs crew, and it needs a kind of finite schedule of shooting. You can't, unless you're Stanley Kubrick, you can't shoot forever on 35mm. And for that, you need to raise money, and you need a script in order to do that. So everything gets a little tidier and a little more fixed when you're dealing with 35mm. It's just the way of it. And then there was this whole other world of our work, which was Super 8, which I hope that the fact that you can all make films on your iPhones doesn't mean you will abandon Super 8, which is one of the most glorious inventions, human inventions. Un buen humano, invento humano, as we say in memory, a really, really beautiful tool for making cinema art. And we would, with The Last of England, even before The Last of England, we were making these experiments with Super 8. We made the first piece we made to blow up to see if it worked was, there was a film called Aria, which was this producer called Don Boyd. The opera film, yes, and he asked various filmmakers, very extraordinary group of filmmakers, I think something like 1987, you know better than me, Gon. Anyway, amazing group of filmmakers, you know, Jean-Luc Godard and Nick Rogue and Ken Russell and Bruce Beresford, and I mean an endless list really, and Derek, to make a little film of an opera and a huge compilation film. And we shot a little piece of me and Spencer Lee in the sea in Cornwall and blew it up to see if it worked.
You shot
on Super 8. Yeah, like family holiday. We went down to the sea in Cornwall for the weekend. We got into our swimming costumes and we jumped in the sea, and then we blew it up and saw what it looked like. And because we felt we liked it, we started to shoot just home movie footage over the course of the next year. And then at a certain point, we started looking at it, and it was like collating an anthology of poetry. So, there's this little piece, and then that little piece, and then at the end, we would go, let's try and knit that together with that, and let's have a little shoot. So then we had a shoot of a few days where we did have a few costumes, and we were a little bit more organised. And that scene by the fire, which is the last section of the film, that was semi-organised, because Sandy Powell made me a wedding dress, and we shot this royal wedding sequence, which was kind of a bit crazy. And I kept saying how uncomfortable the wedding dress was, and Derek said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to cut myself out of it." And so he gave me these massive scissors and said, "Okay, let's light a fire. Okay, Tilda, go." And then 5 people shot me doing it. And I was cutting myself and biting myself out of my wedding ring. But it was improvised. There were a few pieces of decision, like wedding dress, fire, a few Super 8 cameras. But that was it, and the rest was improvised.
It's the same for those of you who have not seen the film. It's Tilda in front of a fire cutting her wedding dress in a very intense manner. Again, you mentioned Super 8, and last week we just had a Super 8 workshop here in the Film Archive with a group of young filmmakers making film from Super 8. They must be so happy to hear you.
So great, because you are so free. Those of you who are painters will feel the material, the medium in your hand when you paint with Super 8. and even if you're not a painter, it will make a painter of you. It's a wonderful freedom just to, and then it really opens up your relationship with the marriage of sound, because it's silent, of course. I also worked with a filmmaker called Klaus Viborni in Fiji in 1986 with a wind-up Bolex. That's another great tool. But this, I think, to work with non-sync sound is a very, very rich and powerful gesture. It sort of really opens up your ears.
I think it's interesting coming from a theatre background to hear the process that you just explained, that there are just a few decisions and you have a lot of freedom in between, and the actors and the directors or the team, the whole team themselves collaborated on what would come out in the end, and you don't actually know from the first step what would be the end result. So that's kind of like a devised theatre process as well. So I'm just wondering at the back of my mind, like maybe you would enjoy devising theatre as well if you.
Yeah, people do, don't they? I think they do.
I do.
Another interesting sort of herb to put into the pot is when you know it's unrepeatable. I think that's a magic spell. When you know that it's now or never, and you are absolutely committed, and also speaking as the person in the frame, when you actually have the idea and everyone else follows you. I mean, no one particularly knew that I was going to start biting my way out of my dress. I was, in that sense, laying the narrative, and that gives the energy to the image as well. If you can sense somehow that this is not take 4. This is the one and only. Yeah.
If you take again, it won't be anything like it.
I don't know the point, really. If you've done it once, why do something different?
This reminds me of a sentence that you spoke in one of the interviews. You said something about the last thing you want is to know what you're doing. Would that kind of be a principle in filmmaking or your acting, that the best way is actually to go without?
I didn't know I'd said that, but I stand by it. I stand by it. I think that's me making friends with the fact that I don't know what I'm doing, and acknowledging that I do get energy from the sort of unknown. I like like now, like I've run aground. I can't find my words, and personally, I like that. I like it when people are kind of a little lost. I think it's useful.
There's another thing that I really would like to bring today is the donkeys. Everybody must already remember the donkeys. You said that they are almost like the guiding star in acting, or they have this quality that is so fascinating that the audience looks for in watching a performance, or even people in documentaries. You also said something about there's a translucence that's really attractive in, for example, the donkeys. Would you say something about the donkeys and this idea around them?
Well, it's interesting. I can sort of, I think what you mean is that I have, people ask, people love lists, and they like to ask you what your favourite films are, or what your favourite foods are, and
These are your favourite.
I've very often said my favourite performance, with absolute sincerity, is the we say the donkey. It's actually several donkeys that must have played the part of Balthazar in Bresson's masterpiece, Au hasard Balthazar. I mean, there must have been many, because he starts unless they shot over many years.
All the donkeys in that film.
Yeah, all the donkeys in that film. Donkeys in general, but donkeys in that film. But it's interesting because I have now had the great privilege to work with my friend Joanna Hogg with my own dogs. And I would include Springer Spaniels, into this hallowed master race of performers. Because, in fact, the most recent film that I made with Joanna, which I won't speak much about because it's not finished yet and it will come later this year, my dog Louis is the Balthazar of this film. Oh, I mean, he really, truly is. Anyway, I believe it's the greatest performance.
So the checklist for the film that Tilda has mentioned is Au hasard Balthazar by Robert Bresson. If possible, we may try to screen it.
You must screen it. You must screen it.
The Joanna Hogg film is The Souvenir.
Well, the Joanna Hogg, I made two films with her, The Souvenir 1 and The Souvenir 2, but there's another one coming at the end of this year called The Eternal Daughter. In the first two, in The Souvenirs, part of the family of Springer Spaniels appears. We have Rosie and Dora in the first one, and then we have Rosie, Dora, and Snow Bear in the second one. They're the recipients of the Palm Dog in Cannes for their performances. But Louis has his solo role in The Eternal Daughter, coming later this year.
Yes, you mentioned Super 8 film and the spontaneous energy that comes with it. But to move things to another extreme, you also work in Hollywood in films that have so much special effects in a very systematic film industry. You were in the Chronicles of Narnia, which my niece keeps watching over and over, and she wants to come today. I'm so sorry that she couldn't because it's school day, kid. You cannot
Send her my love.
The White Witch because it's Friday. And you are also in the Marvel universe. And that's the thing that a lot of people in Thailand remember you by.
Also, my sister who sends a lot of regards, and she's like, what is Tilda from Hollywood doing here? Actually, that's the question.
So what I want to say is that you mentioned Super 8, which is at one extreme, and you have all these special effects on the other extreme. How did you feel when you started working in a film like the Narnia or the Avengers? When it must be so different from working with Direct Jaman.
It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. I mean, the interesting thing for me to notice is that all the studio films, and there is only a handful that I've ever been invited to work with, are all special effects films. And to a certain extent are all experimental films. The first one was Constantine, which Francis Lawrence asked me to work with him on, and it was so exciting because, again, the conversation is always the starting point, and the conversation was very similar. It was Francis Lawrence saying, I don't know what we're going to do. I think these amazing experimental filmmakers, these nerds working with this technology are going to give you amazing wings as Gabriel. I think that they're going to make shards of glass fall through the sky around you. Do you want to come and play? And I said, yeah, sure I do. And the same was true when Andrew Adamson said to me, you know, I'm an animator. I've only worked with animation before, but I'm going to make my first live action film. And I don't know what I'm going to do, but I think I'm going to have centaurs and fawns. Do you want to come and play? And I said, sure. I mean, they are all, and David Fincher, with whom I'm, by the way, next week going to Chicago to work with him again. All of these are cinema geeks, all of these filmmakers. And whenever I've worked with a big studio, it's always been on the same grounds. And I always feel that it's very similar to making a Pet Shop Boys video with Derek in 1988 against a blue screen, because it is. I mean, the conversations are the same. And this feeling of people just trying stuff out, people are always trying to do things for the first time. I remember with David Fincher on the first time I worked with him on a film called Curious Case of Benjamin Button. This was the first time they had de-aged people. So they said, we are going to try and make Brad Pitt look 20. We don't quite know how we're going to do it. I mean, I love that kind of thing. I mean, I'm in for that kind of adventure. So they're all pretty similar, I would say. Yeah.
Now it makes me curious, what kind of spark did you have with Joey, with Abhijit? That like, yes, I'm in. How did that?
Well, the spark for me was when I first saw his cinema. I knew he was a brother, and I knew his cinema was, an environment, certainly for my heart. I didn't necessarily know that he would want to place me in his frame, but I knew that I loved it and I wanted to be in it. It's like a pool that I want to dive into. And I had a strong sense, especially once we'd started to have a dialogue together, that we had, very sympathetic ideas with each other's ideas about cinema and art. So, but again, the same thing. It's an adventure. It's just a mystery. We don't know what we're doing, and I love that. And to not know what you're doing with Joe that's good. That's really good.
The spark that we mentioned maybe when you watch Tropical Malady in Cannes in 2004, right? That was the first time you encounter his cinema, and that developed into a friendship and a work relationship that came to Memoria. Right? Tropical Malady, what was so special about that film?
I mean, in the first place, his frame is so generous, and I just sent him a message this morning. I sent him a link to one of my very favorite pieces of literature, which is a piece an essay by Robert Louis Stevenson, who's a great Scottish writer, called An Apology for Idlers. And I think I first read this piece when I was quite young, maybe 14 or 15, and I was so relieved because it's about go slow. You don't have to run around making money and serving some kind of pre-organized structure. You can just sit by the riverbank and, smell the flowers. And it so expresses the way I felt at 14, and it continues to be like a talisman for me. So when I first saw Joe's cinema, it was like he's Robert Louis Stevenson for me. It's like, again, someone who gets this, someone who is saying, yeah, I'm going to show you the jungle. You can just have a good old look, and you don't have to rush. And you can take in every single leaf. And you know what? I'm suddenly going to turn the tables, and the whole thing's going to flip, and you're going to be lost. I mean, I love this tendency to just to ask for your trust, and so that I think is the first step. That's the first spark.
May I bring up Michael Clayton, because that's the film that you won your Oscar for. And so I kind of went through your filmography, which is a very long filmography. And I noticed that you never play, there's very few roles, or maybe none, that you play a real life character. You don't play like people who really exist in history or in
Mimicry.
Mimicry, yes. Imitation.
It's very sinister.
But Michael Clayton is, I would say it's a very ordinary role, meaning you just play this lawyer, right? And then you won an Oscar for a role that for me is a little bit, well, you're brilliant of course, but it's very ordinary compared to so many other stuff that you've done.
Deep disguise. It was, in many ways, I would say, the most exotic thing for me to do. I don't know any corporate lawyers, and I had no idea how somebody's life would be who lived that sort of existence. And yeah, I would say I had to do more acting there in terms of figuring out the disguise than almost anything. It was very interesting. And also, honestly, playing an American person, I feel that the more time I spend in America, the less I understand. The more foreign I feel. And there's a sort of strange, very, very occasionally, if people don't know that I'm Scottish, people sometimes think I'm English, but we kind of have to forgive them that. But, if anybody ever says, you go back to Los Angeles, I'm not American. European. I'm Scottish. But it's a strange thing that European English speakers or English speakers from anywhere else in the world encountering a kind of American sensibility. I think it's very, very exotic. So that was strange.
You said you don't know any corporate lawyers. Do you sometimes research your character? You have to play a corporate lawyer, have to study how they walk and talk, or that doesn't figure into your approach?
No, I don't really do that. You know what I really need to know the shape of the portrait in the frame. I need to know literally the shape of the body and the shape of the way in which the person will dress themselves, what they will choose to look like, how they will choose to present themselves to other humans, but also their shape in the frame. It's important for me to know, to have a dialogue with the cinematographer and the director also, of course, how much, how close is the camera going to be, what's going to be the level of scrutiny, what's the level of performance, because I say that I'm not interested in performance for myself, but some portraits are of performers, so that person definitely performs. I mean, she's a huge liar. She's just faking it all the way. But you do have these moments of intimate scrutiny of her unmasked. In fact, one of the first moments you see that person, she's in a bathroom stall having a total freak out. But then you see her pull herself back together again and perform this highly successful person who knows what she's doing. Yeah, I think that, for example, with Bong Joon-ho, I've played actors. The characters that I played for him are characters. We have no idea who Mason is, what gender Mason is, what on earth, what animal Mason is. Mason is so covered in disguise, and the same of the Miranda twins in Okja. Yeah.
What's so fascinating about the frame? What makes you love working with the frame?
Well, it's the gateway. It's the environment. It's the landscape. And when I'm watching films, I'm aware that you might have somebody here, but you might have if they're in a kind of mid shot, but you might have a really beautiful lamp there. And sometimes my eye is drawn to the lamp. It's really important to know, if you're sitting on the right of the lamp, that the lamp's going to be there, that you're sharing the environment with the lamp, or with a plant, or with a window, or with a bird coming in, or whatever. To me, maybe I have a very low boredom threshold, so when I'm watching a film, I'm always looking for the birds, or I'm looking for the mosquito, or the wind coming on the curtain. Usually, at least as interested in all of that as the human element, if not more. So if I'm going to be the human element, I like to know what my dance floor is.
Can you act with your voice? An actor can act with their movement, the gestures. what about the voice? We have one voice, I guess, but you mentioned again a little bit briefly earlier that you make a different voice for different film.
Yeah, I
How
think,
does it work?
yes, again, I don't know if I can. It is true that that is another important part for me in the preparation, figuring out what's the voice going to be. Because I think, obviously, there's issues of what's the language going to be, or what's the accent going to be, but also how is the person going to speak? Are they going to be a fluent communicator? Are they going to be more caught? Are they going to be someone who has a kind of double voice? Maybe they have a public voice and they have a private voice. Yeah, that is an interesting. That's as interesting for me in putting something together before shooting as how they might look or how they might move.
I feel like the tools, well, I call it the tools that you were just describing would already be for a lot of actors that this is acting, but you still feel that you don't act in films. So I just asked because I had this question in my head before, like, what is the verb then when you are in film? If you don't see yourself acting, what is the thing that you do when you are in films?
I suppose the general word would be performing, because then it covers. You have to remember, when I started and I worked for a good 9 years with Derek Jarman, I was usually performing myself. I wasn't actually interpreting anything. I mean, very, very briefly, for example, in Wittgenstein, I play a woman called Ottiline Morel, and in Edward II, I play Queen Isabella. But usually, I was playing myself, so it felt more like akin to performance art than it was interpretative acting. But I think performance, I suppose. But the questions you're asking me, both of you, are making me have to really think about how I put something together. And maybe I do have a way of putting it together, but it's not a sort of bag of tricks that I'm particularly invested in. And I think it changes with every piece. It changes with every adventure. I mean, for example, with Memoria, it was very important to me and to Joe, I think, that this portrait really wasn't performative at all. This is someone who is really like a tortoise without a shell, very unsocialized in many ways, and very solitary. And if she speaks, it's a real effort. It's like it's certainly not fluent. And of course, it's also in Spanish, which neither she nor I speak fluently. So there's this halting, hesitant quality, which actually is very, as you can see, very close to me. It's not so far. It's not something that I had to pretend to do. I did grow my hair, and I did dye it dark, and I did put on men's jeans. But beyond that, I was very unmediated, I would say. I mean, that state of Jessica is very close to my own experience in life. So it really felt very sort of full of me.
That's another thing, acting in a different language. In Memoria, you have to speak English and Spanish, but most of the dialogue is in Spanish, I suppose. And that's so another film, I Am Love, which I really enjoyed that film. And you have to speak Italian in that film, right?
Italian with a Russian accent.
Yes. Russian accent.
And Russian, yeah.
So how is it acting in a different language? That puts another layer.
It's, I really enjoy it, actually. I had the great privilege of working with the master Bella Tarr, and we worked with a family. The performer who played my husband was Czech, and our daughter was Hungarian, and we had a massive scene of a massive argument in the film in which he is shouting in Czech and she is shouting in Hungarian and I'm shouting in English. And it felt completely correct because when you're having a big family argument, nobody's listening. Anyway, it feels almost irrelevant to have people speaking the same language in a situation like that. I like this search with language. I'm a little suspicious of fluency. I think, particularly in art, I find that art, the greatest sort of use of art is to explore inarticulacy, and the whole idea of people talking like playwrights is a dangerous tendency, I think, in the cinema. Or it's dangerous in the theatre as well, I believe, but particularly in the cinema. I think there's a formality in the theatre which maybe holds that kind of fluency, but in very often. But in the cinema, it's the province of openness and hesitation and unwatched gestures.
You mean the inability to fully speak or understand a language is a plus, actually, because it makes you less conscious.
That's what I mean.
Of what you're doing.
Yes, I think so. Because it throws you into this state of unfinishedness and mess. So you're not quite sure, like I am now, not quite sure that you're making yourself clear, and you're not quite sure that you're accurately able to translate what's in your head. Like Jessica says in Memoria, of course it sounds different in my own head. That's I adore this moment. This is like the artist's predicament. How do I get out of my head, out of my ear, or put it down my nose or whatever? How do I get out of my head something that I can present to you so you can get it in the same way that it appears in my own head? I mean, it's kind of impossible, but that's why art's worth it.
Yeah, just before this activity, we were talking quite a lot about this word that you repeated a lot, predicament, and you also said that Jessica is not a character, but she is a predicament. I think you just said this yesterday in the talk. Would you elaborate?
Well, I like the potential for Jessica to be a portal for anybody in the audience to know that predicament, to know that experience, even if it's a moment. It doesn't have to be the entire panoply of the adventure she goes through, but to sit at a dining room, to go, I've sat in a restaurant and been distracted by something and tried to connect with the conversation that my friends are having, and then been distracted. Whatever it is, the idea of her being holding her hand out to the audience and saying, you know what this is, and not to present something exotic and rare, and not in fact to push anything on the audience, but in fact to invite the audience in. I mean, in general, I would say that that's what I'm in it for. But with Jessica in particular, she pushes so little out of the frame. She's really the frame is so porous anyway. But she's an antenna. She's not only inviting in all the sights and sounds in the film, but she's also inviting the audience in. She's like, oh, come.
Sorry if I keep coming with terms that really might annoy you, because in maybe acting terms, there's preparation, and we did say something about preparation. And people prepare to become something, to get into a role, but if Jessica is not a role, she is the antenna. How do you prepare to become that space for the camera or the audience?
Well, I suppose, and this is going to sound much more technical and organised than it was or is, I suppose then it's about shedding and trying to free oneself up to be really relaxed. I mean, in general, I would say that's the only work that I ever do, is to try and be relaxed, truly, and whatever that means. If when I'm playing Karen Crowder, corporate lawyer, American in Michael Clayton, then my goal is that on day one I will be super relaxed. So how am I best going to be super relaxed? Well, I'd better get the look right, I'd better get the voice right, I'd better learn the lines, and that's a chunk of change, that's a lot of work. And with Memoria or with Orlando, it's about shedding, it's about divesting oneself of all the things that might get in the way of being really open and really relaxed and vulnerable as Jessica or as Orlando or whatever. And they're different pieces of work to get there, but the aim is the same. It's just to be ready and responsive and open and free, actually. Just to be free to be able to play. And sometimes, you're right, it does involve putting together a disguise, but the aim is always the same, to reach that state of kind of playfulness and relaxation.
So it's like you actually have different paths or maybe doorways, I would say, to get you to this one point, which is a relaxed state, but you use different things doing different.
Yeah, but it's a never-ending variety. I mean, I would say there are no preset paths. There's a different path for every single portrait. There's a different path for every single adventure. It's just whatever is going to get one softened up to be that free.
To me, to sum it up, I think it's about being not conscious of what you are doing, right? But because if you're being conscious of what you are doing, of what you are acting, then it becomes a technique, right? And I think that's the word we are trying for today, like the technique in acting.
Well, that's interesting, although again, I'm thinking of everything we've said, I'm sort of running through it in my mind, and I'm thinking, you know what, I kind of do have a technique. I mean, you're making me think that I do, but I'll tell you, I see you and I raise you. I'll give you another word, which is a darker word, which is defences. I would like to think that one aims to be in a place with no defences when one starts to enter a frame. And I suppose, and this is my ignorance again, my suspicion about too much technique is that too much technique can be defensive, can be a way of not being present. It can be, lots of bells and whistles and masses of smoke and mirrors and fabulous acting, but kind of not generous at the end of the day, and a way of pushing the audience away. The opposite of this porous thing, this like dazzling the audience with fabulous acting technique. I don't know. And again, that's my ignorance, and I did not go to some amazing drama school, or I never studied acting. I'm sure that there are all sorts of ways in which it's possible to have very highly developed technique and not to be defensive. But my concern would be that it could be a red herring, it could be a distraction, and it could keep you closed.
He has raised us. Okay, we have to take this defensive thing and then raise it one more time.
Well, I actually no, I feel like I'm just flowing. I do not feel this defense or raising or anything. But now I'm imagining if you have this way of preparing yourself, whatever tools, techniques, and when you encounter maybe an actor who has a different way of working, how does it balance out, or how do you work with he or she or they?
Well, everybody has different ways of working, I've no doubt. I mean, I'm certain no one's got way of working like mine. That's the joy of working with people in all departments on a film set. You're coming together, and there's this agreement between you to serve the moment. I'd never quite put into words this thing about relaxation before. I don't know if you would agree with that as an actor, whether that's something that all actors might aim for. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Maybe for some actors it's important to feel very gathered and kind of carapaced. I don't know, but fortunately, being so ignorant, what I'm concentrating on when we're actually working together as performers is a feeling of complicity and a feeling of friendliness and a feeling of camaraderie, so that we can work together. So I don't know necessarily what someone else is putting together inside, but I hope that and my experience has been pretty much always, everybody looks like they're coming towards a point of just being able to play together.
That makes me think of Doctor Strange again, because you starting opposite Benedict Cumberbatch, and as I was watching Doctor Strange, which again I really enjoyed, and I saw these two great actors playing, sword and magic and all this supernatural power, a la Marvel, and you're talking about working with different actors. Maybe can you tell us something about being in the Avengers with Benedict?
I always forget that I was in the Avengers, to be honest with you. It was like a matter of a couple of days. Doctor Strange I remember very well. That was a very interesting shoot and highly technical, which was so great. When someone says you have to put your hand, you can't do it there because we're going to be painting it in afterwards. Oh, great! I'm a robot. So I would say in a way, my memory was that we were all so interested and excited by all the technical it was like child's play, and it didn't feel to me as if Benedict and I were not doing the same thing. I think we were all very involved in being very thrilled to be there. I don't know, but maybe real actors go and sit and talk about acting, but I tend to take a pack of cards. That's the best way to spend any time in between shooting.
Actually, when we were preparing questions and scripts, we did write in the paper that because we have the ancient one, it takes two mortals to handle this today. So it's an interesting image that people remember you from the Marvel universe. I think let's do Tilda's service of moving a little bit off the acting to other parts of your life where you did a lot to support the cinema in general. Apart from acting, you organize film events, you research, you fundraise, and so many things. And has this been from the beginning that these are the things that you would like to do? Because you did start wanting to be in the frame. This is how you wanted to get involved with cinema. How did all these other activities come about?
No, I would say the opposite, that maybe I didn't make myself clear. Being in the frame was very much an afterthought. That was not my commitment. My commitment has always been to the cinema as a culture and the cinema as a fact. So no, that's always been that's my mother. That's my happy place. And so my real dream is to run a cinema full time. I did run a cinema for a short while in our village, until somebody bought a house behind it and made it impossible to continue. But yeah, that's really my dream, is to run a cinema. So anything I can do that can tickle that dream is really my delight.
One of the projects that get a lot of coverage was your cinema mobile, when you and Mark Cousin, right? You two physically dragged a mobile cinema unit across Scotland, or
This is an amazing. Can I just have a look? I just have a look. Please have a look at this photograph. That's not the one I thought it was.
That's not in the script. That's not in the script. Just came up with it right now.
So Mark Cousins and I had, as we know everywhere, every small town all over the world had at least one cinema in it at one time. I'm sure in Thailand the same. And our village, which is not big, it's a very small town, had 2 cinemas. And now there's a multiplex in half an hour away where you can go and see Harry Potter and Marvel. And I wanted to start a cinema in our village, and there was an old bingo hall where. Do you have bingo in Thailand? Yeah. And people used to go. It was a very important place. People went on Wednesday, and it was possible for people to check up where Mrs. Mikilikadi is not here this week. We have to go and see if she's okay. It's a very important part of the social life, particularly of a certain generation. And I saw one day that it was closed as a bingo hall. So I rented it as a cinema, and we had a film festival there with bean bags, with just projected DVDs, very lo-fi. I said that the design aesthetic was the school dance in Napoleon Dynamite. This was the emblematic look, and we had you could get in for free if you dressed according to the film, or if you brought home baking. And so we had an incredible cafe with great cakes. But then this wonderful festival, as I said earlier, we weren't able to continue because a house.
Which town was it again?
It's called Nairn. It's a little town in the Highlands of Scotland. So the following year we lost our house, so we decided to go mobile. So that's me, sorry. That mobile cinema is it goes around the Highlands, and so we hired it, and we decided to pull it for an hour a day. And what I thought that photograph was, there's another photograph which is quite famous now, which was, we had this massive rope, this what's it called, tug of war rope, and we attached it to the front of this 40-ton truck, and we told everybody we were going to do it. But I realised we were there, Mark and I were there, and the very first day, all the press were there, and I realised we had done no rehearsal, and we didn't know whether we could do it or not. And it was amazing, we just pulled, and this moment when it moved was unbelievable, and there's a photograph of that moment of us, like this, and we called it the pilgrimage. And we had a group of pilgrims, and even now we meet pilgrims all over the world. They came from all over the world to come with us, and we went to villages that have no cinema, we went to fields, we went to the side of the lochs, and we went to beautiful. It was all road movies, and it was magical.
Is it still going on?
Well, the whole concept is to be unreliable. So one day, when no one's expecting, we will do something else, unique and unexpected and ramshackle. And I don't know where, but it was a beautiful thing.
This story is very touching to, especially us here at the Thai Film Archive, because we try to promote the experience of cinema, of people going to the cinema, and exactly as you have just said, we realize that in Thailand, we used to have cinemas in every town. Every small town has a cinema, but that's no longer the case now. about your project. This is something that we have here, the Cine Mobile. Is a truck, you can see the photo here. It's actually parking outside. If you go out to the film archive, to the left, we put it there. So this truck it can, like in the transformer.
Yes,
Yes, the truck will move, transform into
transform
a cinema.
Like a fan.
You can seat 100 people. You can seat 100 people, and we drove this truck around Thailand, going to small villages and schools and temples to screen movies for people, students, old people, everywhere. But unfortunately, in the past 2 years, because of the pandemic, we have stopped the operation, but we are going to resume it.
I think I would like to embolden you not only to resume it, but to intensify and to multiply and really reinvigorate this idea of event for cinema. Because the whole conversation around, for example, cinema, to pit cinema against streaming, it feels to me it's like a fake argument. It doesn't work. It doesn't really hold any water. Because what this can do, it's an unmatched, it's like having a fight between a poodle and a Rottweiler. It's completely the wrong match. Streaming can do what streaming does. Cinema can do what cinema can do. And unless you all pile into the same bed and watch something streamed, which very often happens, it's not an event. This is an event, and that is an event. And the feeling of reminding people how incredibly important that event was, as you say, in the life of the village, for years and years and years. My friend John Byrne, who was my children's father, who was born in 1940, he always told me all the stories of going to the movies in the 50s as a child in Scotland, in a small town outside Glasgow, where there were like 40 film houses, and the films showed for 1 week, but they had 40 different films to see every week. These kids, and they didn't pay. Of course, they went under the barriers, and in those days you didn't have times for the screenings. They would just be showing a film, and you would go in and you would watch it halfway through, all the way around through the credits and through the opening credits and round. It's very sophisticated to do that, actually. It's a very sophisticated narrative exercise. I think we need to really remember how important that is still for us. I mean, as I said last night, and I continue to say, one of the things that the pandemic, which we can't blame everything on the pandemic, and in fact the pandemic we can bless for some things, and one of the things I would bless it for is the focus that it's brought to everybody, not just cine nuts like us, the things that people really missed during the lockdown: friends and family, live music, cinema. Everybody, not even people who didn't go to the cinema very often, really missed the cinema, and this is a very good thing. And everyone's seen more streaming than they ever need to in their life. They'll go on, it'll all go on, it's fine, but it's not the point of cinema. And so I think it will be revived, and we need to really re-embolden ourselves with this kind of gesture.
Because you see, this memorial release campaign, I think at the back of your ticket, there's a word, back to the cinema, right? I think that's one of the slogans of this event, back to the cinema. And the slogan of the film archive is Cinema Enlightens. If you go down to the 5th floor, we have it emblazoned on the wall, Cinema Enlightens. So, yes, back to the cinema, because cinema enlightens.
And another motto, which is my personal motto for many years, which is also the motto of BFI, which is my alma mater, is film forever. Film forever. There's no sell-by date. They always used to say, I think they still do, on the bottom, when you look at the bottom of a Hollywood film in the small print, it's like a legal stamp. It says, throughout the universe in perpetuity. I love that. It's really right. Throughout the universe, intergalactic, unstoppable. Yeah.
that's how we should watch Memoria. I think this is what I talked to Jerry from the beginning, that if you want to watch, or what he told me is that if you want to watch Memoria, there's no point watching it on a small screen. It's like watching another film, a completely different film. Only in the cinema that movie becomes, that memory
An
becomes
experience.
Yes, an experience, but also I think that there's a misunderstanding. There's a sort of, again, a red herring that's a misunderstanding about what cinema can give us. When the culture, maybe commercial culture, tries to encourage the idea that all a film can give us is narrative, plot, character. That's all. It's such a waste. A film like Memoria is what I call sensational. It's about the senses. It's not just about the ears. It's also, you feel like you've been in the jungle. You feel like you can, it's almost smell-o-vision. That's the next thing we have to do. But, you know, this sense of immersion and living in the time, it's got nothing to do with plot or narrative arc or, heaven forbid, character development. It's nothing to do with those things. I'm sure they're very valuable in a certain kind of cinema and certainly in a certain kind of theatre. But this is, a more specific and more, I would say, inclusive use of cinema, this sensationalism.
I didn't set out to glorify cinema over all other forms of media, but it looks like we are doing that right now, and I don't regret it at all.
No regrets. And cinema is so robust. As I'm always saying, cinema has one of the first things I did when the lockdown happened, when we all went home and were peaceful for the summer. I took down the biography, the wonderful 2-part autobiography of one of my favorite filmmakers, Michael Powell. And I read his biography, and I couldn't understand why I went to it like a sort of nourishment. His autobiography is kind of the history of cinema. He was sort of the same age as cinema. He started in silent cinema. He was like sweeping up the studios in the south of France with Rex Ingrams in the teens, the 19-teens. And when you read his autobiography, you remember that cinema has withstood so much. The coming of colour was the most enormous catastrophe. When colour came, it was like much worse than the pandemic. Went on for much longer. All the studios closed. All the cinemas closed. Nobody had the right equipment to show the films when sound came. It was a disaster. They really talked about cinema being over because of sound. Because they did not know, the technicians didn't know how to work with sound. There was not the equipment to either record or to project. It was a hiatus, big hiatus. And then along comes colour, similar kind of crisis, and then television, and then DVD, video, DVD, whatever. Streaming is just another blip. It's another negotiation. But cinema is so robust.
It's going to live. And I think this is a good moment to shift to our audience who's been listening, and I'm sure there are questions that we